A cop arrests two teen black twins on the side of the road thinking they're up to no good. But just 3 minutes later, that same cop is the one crying in handcuffs. What did these innocent girls do, or say, that turned everything upside down? Why did the truth hurt him more than any punishment ever could? And what secret were these twins carrying that would bring an entire department to its knees? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen curtains, casting warm patterns across the Green family's breakfast table. Ava sat quietly, pushing her scrambled eggs around her plate while stealing glances at her mother, who seemed unusually cheerful for 6 a.m. Next to her, Aaliyah was already finished eating, drumming her fingers against the wooden table with barely contained energy. Monique Green stood at the counter, humming softly as she packed 2 identical brown paper lunch bags. Her shoulders looked lighter today, less weighed down by the invisible burden she'd carried for years. She turned to face her daughters, a manila envelope held carefully in her hands. "Before you girls head out," Monique said, her voice warm but holding a hint of something else, pride maybe, or anticipation. "I picked this up from Mrs. Martinez yesterday." She placed the envelope between the twins on the table. Aaliyah immediately reached for it, but Monique's hand gently pressed down on the envelope. "Not yet," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Open it when you get to the airport." "Mom," Aaliyah groaned, slumping back in her chair. "You know I hate surprises. This is so dramatic, even for you." Ava's stomach did a little flip as she stared at the envelope. The Yale logo had been blue. She remembered that much from all the admissions materials she'd obsessed over. Through the thin manila paper, she couldn't make out any telling colors or shapes. "Dramatic is my middle name," Monique replied with a small smile, gathering the breakfast dishes. "And patience is a virtue you could stand to work on, Miss Aaliyah Marie Green." The kitchen fell into comfortable silence as the girls finished getting ready. Ava double-checked her backpack for the 10th time, phone charger, wallet, ID. Her hands shook slightly as she zipped it closed. The weight of the morning pressed against her chest, not uncomfortable exactly, but present. "Come here, my beautiful girls," Monique said finally, opening her arms wide. The twins moved into their mother's embrace, a well-practiced dance they'd performed countless times before. Monique squeezed them tight, her chin resting on their heads even though they'd grown taller than her years ago. "Remember everything we talked about," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Keep your phones charged. Text me when you land. And most importantly, stay aware, stay alive," the girls finished in unison, the familiar mantra flowing automatically from their lips. "That's right." Monique pulled back, wiping quickly at her eyes. "Now go on, before I change my mind and keep you here forever." The morning air was crisp as they loaded their bags into Aaliyah's used Civic. The car had been their father's last gift to them, delivered through their mother's careful saving of his pension. Its navy blue paint was faded in places and the rear taillight had a crack that caught the sun like a prism, but it ran perfectly. Their mother had made sure of that. As they pulled away from the curb, Ava watched their mother's figure grow smaller in the side mirror. Monique stood on the porch, one hand raised in farewell, the other pressed against her heart, a gesture so distinctly their mother that Ava felt tears prick at her eyes. "You good?" Aaliyah asked softly, glancing at her sister as they turned onto their street. Ava nodded, clutching the envelope in her lap. "Yeah, just, you know." And Aaliyah did know. They drove in comfortable silence through their neighborhood, past the park where they'd learned to ride bikes, the corner store where their father used to buy them ice cream after school, before everything changed. "Remember how Dad used to let us ride on his shoulders here?" Aaliyah said suddenly as they passed the community center. "He'd pretend he was a horse, making those ridiculous neighing sounds." Ava smiled, the memory warming her chest. And Mom would yell at him about safety, but she was always laughing too. "He was a good cop," Aaliyah said quietly, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. "A good man." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. As if on cue, a patrol car cruised past them in the opposite direction. Both girls stiffened slightly, an unconscious reaction born from years of learned caution. Ava watched it disappear in the side mirror, her heart beating a little faster until it was gone. "Mom says we can't let fear rule us," Ava murmured, smoothing her fingers over the envelope's surface. "But sometimes I wonder if she's more scared than any of us." "She has to be," Aaliyah replied. "She's Mom. Being scared for us is like her full-time job." She paused, then added with a small smile, "Along with being dramatic and mysterious with random envelopes." Ava laughed, grateful for her sister's ability to lighten any moment. The sound had barely faded when she caught a flash of red and blue in the rearview mirror. Her laughter died in her throat. "Ali," she whispered, her fingers digging into the envelope. Aaliyah had already seen it. The patrol car's lights pulsed steadily behind them, growing larger in the mirror. With practiced calm, she signaled and pulled over to the side of the road, her movements deliberate and smooth. "It's just the tail light," Ava said softly, but the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. They both knew better. Their mother had taught them well. The sisters exchanged a look, one that carried the weight of their father's memory, their mother's warnings, and 18 years of shared understanding. In the rearview mirror, the patrol car door opened with a sharp click. Officer Ryan Daniels approached the vehicle with measured steps, his polished boots crunching against loose gravel. Each movement was deliberate, a product of years of routine traffic stops. The morning sun caught his badge, sending sharp glints of light across the car's navy blue paint. He adjusted his belt with the practiced motion of a man who'd done this thousands of times, mentally cataloging details as he approached. He noticed the girl's rigid postures through the window, textbook nervous behavior. His jaw tightened. In his experience, nervous meant guilty. Something about these two didn't sit right with him, though he couldn't articulate why. He rapped his knuckles against the driver's side window with 3 sharp taps, watching as both girls flinched at the sound, their shoulders tensing in unison. Aaliyah lowered the window smoothly, her hands visible on the steering wheel just as their mother had taught them. "Good morning, officer," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. Sweat beaded along her hairline despite the mild temperature. Daniels leaned down, scanning the interior of the car with practiced efficiency. His gaze lingered on the manila envelope in Ava's lap before shifting to the back seat, looking for anything suspicious. "License and registration," he demanded, his tone clipped and professional, the words coming automatically after years on patrol. As Aaliyah reached slowly for her documents in the glove compartment, Ava spoke up, her voice soft but clear. "Officer, if this is about the taillight, we're aware of the crack. We have an appointment to fix it next." "I'll tell you what this is about," Daniels cut her off, straightening to his full height. The movement was subtle but intentional, a reminder of his authority. His shadow fell across their faces as he towered over the car window. "What's in the envelope?" Ava's fingers tightened around the paper, crinkling it slightly. "It's private, sir. Just some school-related documents from our guidance counselor." Her heart fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird. Daniel's expression hardened. The answer felt rehearsed to him, too smooth. Years of instinct, what he called instinct, prickled at the back of his neck. These girls were hiding something, he was sure of it. "Step out of the vehicle, both of you." The sisters exchanged a quick glance, a silent conversation passing between them. Neither moved, frozen in place by uncertainty and growing fear. "I said," Daniels repeated, his voice rising as his right hand drifted toward his holster, the leather creaking under his touch. "Step out of the vehicle. Now." Ava's heart hammered in her chest as she carefully slipped her phone from her pocket, keeping it low and partially hidden by the envelope. With trembling fingers, she pressed the record button, angling it toward the window. The screen lit up briefly before she concealed it. "Sir," Aaliyah tried again, her voice wavering slightly. "We haven't done anything wrong. The taillight—" "Out!" Daniels barked, his patience evaporating like morning dew. "Hands where I can see them." The girls complied, moving with the careful precision their mother had drilled into them since childhood. No sudden movements, no arguments. Stay alive. Words that shouldn't have to be taught to children, yet were essential lessons in their household. The morning air felt thick and heavy as they stood on the sidewalk. Daniels circled them like a predator, his boots scraping against concrete. "Hands against the car," he ordered, pulling his handcuffs free with a metallic jingle that made Ava's stomach twist. "Both of you." "This isn't necessary," Ava whispered, tears beginning to roll down her cheeks as the cold metal closed around her wrists with unnecessary force. Her phone, still recording, pressed uncomfortably against her hip, a small witness to their ordeal. Aaliyah winced as Daniels roughly secured her own cuffs, tight enough to bite into her skin. "You're hurting us," she gasped, but her protest was met with silence. The indignity burned in her chest like fire. The quiet morning was suddenly pierced by a voice from across the street. "Is he arresting them for a taillight?" Daniels turned sharply, looking up at a nearby apartment building. On a second-floor balcony, a woman stood with her phone held high, its camera lens catching the morning light. Her arm was steady, documenting every moment of the scene unfolding below. Her presence was both a comfort and a humiliation. The sound of Ava's quiet sobs filled the air as the woman's phone continued to record, broadcasting their humiliation to an unseen audience. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk, where two young black women stood handcuffed while their father's envelope lay forgotten on the passenger seat, its contents still a mystery, but now a focus of unwarranted suspicion. From her second-floor balcony, Camilla Reyes gripped her phone tightly, her knuckles white against the dark case. The morning air felt heavy with tension as she positioned herself for a better view of the scene unfolding below. Her journalism instincts, though years dormant, kicked in with full force. "I'm live now from Oak Street," she narrated, her voice clear and steady despite the anger bubbling in her chest. "What started as a routine traffic stop has turned into something else entirely." She zoomed in carefully, making sure to capture every detail of the scene. The twin girls knelt on the rough concrete, their hands bound behind their backs. Their faces showed a mix of fear and resignation that made Camilla's stomach turn. She'd seen that look before, too many times in her old reporting days. "Two young black women," she continued, keeping her tone measured but firm. "They're on their knees now. No weapons, no resistance." She adjusted her angle slightly, making sure her viewers could see exactly what she was seeing. "They're in handcuffs like criminals, but all I've witnessed is compliance." The morning sun cast harsh shadows across the scene, highlighting the power dynamic playing out on the quiet suburban street. Officer Daniels moved with an air of authority that seemed excessive for a simple traffic stop. Camilla's stream counter ticked up, 50 viewers, then 100, then more. "The officer is now searching their vehicle," she narrated, her voice taking on an edge of controlled outrage. "No warrant shown, no probable cause stated." She zoomed in as Daniels rifled through the back seat, his movements becoming increasingly aggressive as he found nothing suspicious. The manila envelope caught his attention. Camilla watched as he snatched it from the passenger seat, holding it up like evidence. The girl's protests were clear through her phone's microphone. "That's private." Ava's voice cracked with desperation. "Please, those are our school documents," Aaliyah added, her words tight with restraint. Daniels ignored them both, tearing open the envelope with calculated indifference. Camilla's viewers could hear the paper ripping, the sound sharp in the morning quiet. The officer pulled out several official-looking documents, his eyes scanning the contents quickly. His next words carried clearly through the still air, dripping with cynicism. "Every dealer says they're going to college." Camilla couldn't suppress her sharp intake of breath, the sound carrying through her live stream. "Did you all hear that?" she asked her viewers, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "The officer just implied these young women are drug dealers, their crime having scholarship paperwork." The comment section of her stream exploded with reactions. Camilla read a few aloud, her voice growing stronger with each one. "This is wrong. Call for backup. Someone help those girls." She continued documenting every detail, her phone steady despite her shaking hands. The twins remained on their knees, their school uniforms collecting dirt from the sidewalk. Their posture spoke of dignity under pressure, but Camilla could see the tears tracking down Ava's cheeks, catching the morning light. "These are children," she emphasized to her growing audience. "They're in school uniforms, they're carrying college paperwork, and they're being treated like criminals for a broken taillight." The sound of an approaching vehicle drew her attention. Through her phone's screen, she captured a sleek black car slowing down as it approached the scene. The luxury vehicle's tinted windows reflected the morning sun, but as the back window rolled down, Camilla could make out the face of an elegant older black woman. Even from her balcony, Camilla could see the moment recognition dawned on the woman's face. The change was subtle but unmistakable, a slight widening of the eyes, a tightening of the jaw. The car came to a smooth stop, and Camilla zoomed in just enough to capture the woman's expression as she surveyed the scene. "Oh no," the woman's voice carried clearly through the morning air. "Not these girls." Camilla watched as the woman put her car firmly in park, her movements deliberate and purposeful. There was something about her presence that commanded attention, even from a distance. The way she held herself, the careful calculation in her eyes. This wasn't just any passing witness. "My viewers," Camilla narrated, her voice taking on a new urgency. "Someone else has just arrived on the scene. And from her reaction, she knows these young women." The comment section of her live stream exploded again, but Camilla kept her focus on the unfolding scene. She had been a journalist long enough to recognize when a story was about to take a turn. The woman's arrival felt like a shift in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. The viewer count on her stream had climbed into the thousands now, and Camilla felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. She had started recording because it was instinct, because it was right, because someone needed to witness what was happening. Now, with so many eyes on this moment, she knew her simple act of observation had become something much larger. "Stay with me," she told her viewers, her voice steady and clear. "Whatever happens next, we're going to make sure it's documented. These girls deserve witnesses. They deserve the truth to be told." The morning sun continued to climb higher in the sky, casting shorter shadows across the scene below. Camilla's phone remained steady, capturing every detail. The twins still kneeling on the concrete, Officer Daniels standing over them with their college paperwork in his hands, and now this elegant woman emerging from her luxury car, her face set with determination and recognition. The street had fallen silent except for the soft idling of the woman's car engine and the occasional sniffle from one of the twins. It was the kind of silence that preceded significant moments, the kind that Camilla had learned to recognize during her years in journalism. She kept her phone focused, ready to capture whatever came next. Judge Celeste Monroe emerged from her car with the practiced grace of someone who had commanded courtrooms for decades. Her heels clicked purposefully against the pavement as she approached the scene, each step measured and deliberate. She wore a tailored navy suit that spoke of authority, and her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a neat bun that emphasized her sharp, observant eyes. The morning light caught the small gold pin on her lapel, a scales of justice symbol she'd worn since her first day on the bench 30 years ago. "Officer," she called out, her voice carrying the weight of years spent delivering verdicts. From her leather handbag, she withdrew an identification card, holding it up with unwavering confidence. "I'm Judge Celeste Monroe, retired federal court." The card gleamed in the sunlight, a reminder of the power she still carried even in retirement. Officer Daniels barely glanced at the ID, his posture stiffening defensively. "This is a police matter, ma'am," he said dismissively, positioning himself between her and the twins. "I'll have to ask you to step back." His hand rested casually on his holster, not a threat but a reminder of his authority in this situation. Monroe's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened. "These young women," she said, each word precise and crystal clear, "are part of the Future Leaders Literacy Program. My program." She took another step forward, her presence somehow growing larger despite her modest height. "I founded it 15 years ago to mentor promising students like Ava and Aaliyah Green." Her voice carried the same conviction that had once made attorneys tremble in her courtroom. From her balcony, Camilla adjusted her phone's angle to capture both Monroe's commanding presence and Daniel's increasingly uncertain stance. The viewer count on her live stream ticked upward rapidly. 5,000, 8,000, 12,000. Comments flooded in faster than she could read them, a digital chorus of outrage and support. Monroe reached into her bag again, this time pulling out her phone. With deliberate movements, she dialed a number and put it on speaker. The rings echoed in the tense morning air. Birds fell silent, as if they too were waiting for what would happen next. "Chief Harrison speaking," a gruff voice answered. "James," Monroe said, her tone dropping several degrees. "This is Celeste Monroe. I'm standing on Oak Street watching one of your officers harass two of my mentees over a broken taillight." Her voice was controlled but carried an edge that made even Camilla shiver from her perch above. The judge's fingers tightened around the phone, the only visible sign of her anger. The silence on the other end was heavy. "Judge Monroe," the chief responded, his tone shifting to one of concern. "Can you elaborate?" "Certainly." Monroe's eyes never left Daniels as she spoke. "Officer Daniels here has two 17-year-old honors students handcuffed on the ground. He searched their vehicle without cause or warrant and opened private correspondence." She paused, letting each accusation land. "Would you like me to continue?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. More neighbors had begun emerging from their homes, drawn by the commotion and Camilla's livestream. Phones appeared in hands, additional cameras pointing toward the scene. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of the growing audience. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Monroe bent down and picked up the scattered scholarship papers from where Daniels had dropped them. With careful precision, she smoothed out the creases and began to read aloud. "Dear Ms. Ava Green and Ms. Aaliyah Green," she projected her voice clearly, ensuring everyone could hear. "We are pleased to inform you that you have both been selected for the Yale University Early Achievement Scholarship Program." She looked up at Daniels, her gaze unwavering. "Shall I continue with their SAT scores and academic achievements, officer?" Every word was delivered with the same dignity she'd once used to read landmark opinions from the bench. The twins remained on their knees, but their backs had straightened slightly at the reading of their acceptance letter. Tears still streaked Ava's face, but they were different now, pride mixing with the fear and humiliation. Her hands trembled, but her chin lifted just a fraction higher. The chief's voice crackled through the phone's speaker, sharp and commanding. "Officer Daniels, step away from the girls. Right now." Daniels hesitated, his hand twitching near his belt. His eyes darted between the kneeling girls, Judge Monroe's steely gaze, and the forest of phones recording his every move. The morning sun seemed to spotlight him as he stood frozen in indecision. His badge caught the light, a symbol of authority now turned into a spotlight on his actions. A patrol car pulled up, lights flashing. Daniels' partner emerged, taking in the scene with growing comprehension. The new officer's expression shifted from confusion to understanding in seconds. "That's an order, Daniels," the chief's voice rang out again. "Step back and surrender your weapon to Officer Martinez." Finally, Daniels' shoulders slumped in defeat. He took 2 steps backward, his movements mechanical as his partner approached with handcuffs ready. The sound of the metal cuffs opening echoed in the sudden quiet of the street. Judge Monroe knelt beside the twins, producing a small key from her bag. With gentle movements, she unlocked their cuffs, helping each girl to their feet. Her hands lingered on their shoulders, steady and reassuring. "It's over now," she whispered. "Just for them. You're safe." Camilla's voice carried clearly from her balcony, her live stream now reaching tens of thousands. 3 minutes ago, he had them on the ground. Now look who's crying. Indeed, as Officer Martinez secured the handcuffs around his partner's wrists, Daniel's eyes had grown wet, his face crumpling as the reality of his situation sank in. The same sun that had witnessed his abuse of power now illuminated the tears tracking down his cheeks. His uniform, once a shield, now felt like a weight dragging him down into the consequences of his actions. The morning sun cast long shadows across Oak Street as more people gathered around the scene. What had started as a quiet neighborhood moment had transformed into something much bigger. Phones were raised like a forest of electronic witnesses, each one capturing and sharing the unfolding drama. The crowd had grown from a handful of curious onlookers to several dozen people, their murmurs creating a low buzz of tension and disbelief. Camilla's livestream counter kept climbing, 40,000, 45,000, 50,000. Her hands were steady as she continued to document everything, her voice providing clear, factual narration. "The crowd keeps growing," she reported to her viewers. "People are coming from all directions. This isn't just our neighborhood anymore. This is becoming something bigger." She wasn't wrong. Cars were pulling over, drivers stepping out to join the gathering. Some had seen her live stream and driven from nearby areas, while others were simply passing by and drawn to the unusual congregation. The scene had the feeling of a powder keg, but the presence of Judge Monroe seemed to keep everyone's emotions in check. A second patrol car pulled up with its lights flashing, the red and blue strobes adding to the surreal atmosphere. Officer Jaime Nguyen stepped out, his face set in a grim expression as he took in the situation. He was younger than Daniels, with sharp features and alert eyes that quickly assessed the scene. The crowd parted slightly to let him through, phones tracking his movement. Nguyen approached his partner, who stood handcuffed and ashen-faced near the first patrol car. "Let's step aside," he said quietly, guiding Daniels away from the main group. They moved to a spot near a large oak tree, partially sheltered from the dozens of recording devices. "What were you thinking?" Nguyen's voice was low but intense. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Daniels lifted his chin defiantly, though his hands trembled in the cuffs. They were acting suspicious. The envelope, their nervousness. "Stop!" Nguyen cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Just stop. You know who that judge is? Monroe didn't just sit on the federal bench. She trained half the department in implicit bias workshops 3 years ago. The chief himself attended her seminars." The color drained from Daniels's face as recognition flickered in his eyes. He remembered now. The workshops he dismissed as political correctness gone too far. The sessions he dozed through while telling himself he didn't need this kind of training. They were acting sketchy, Daniels insisted, but his voice had lost its earlier authority. He sounded more like a child trying to justify breaking a window than a police officer defending his actions. Nguyen stepped closer, his voice dropping even lower. "No, Ryan. You saw 2 black girls. That's all you needed." The words landed like physical blows. "And now everyone sees you." Indeed, despite their relative privacy by the tree, dozens of phones were still pointed in their direction. Camilla's livestream had captured their exchange, though not the words, and her viewers were now approaching 60,000. Back near the center of the scene, Judge Monroe stood with her arms protectively around the Green twins. Ava had stopped crying, but her shoulders were still tight with tension. Aaliyah's face showed a mixture of anger and exhaustion, as if the weight of years of similar incidents had suddenly become visible. The torn envelope lay on the hood of their car, its contents partially spilling out. The Yale letterhead was clearly visible, along with several other official-looking documents. Monroe gathered the papers carefully, straightening them with the precision of someone who understood the value of both their contents and what they represented. The crowd continued to grow, with some people holding up hastily made signs reading "Black Lives Matter" and "Stop Police Brutality." But unlike many similar gatherings, this one maintained a strange sort of quiet dignity, as if taking its cue from Judge Monroe's calm but commanding presence. Officer Nguyen opened the back door of his patrol car. "Time to go," he said to Daniels, who had finally fallen silent. The former confidence had drained from Daniels' posture, replaced by the slumped shoulders of a man seeing his actions clearly for the first time. Camilla zoomed in as Daniels was guided into the back seat. Her narration was steady and factual. "Officer Daniels is now being placed in the same type of vehicle where he's probably transported countless others. The difference is this time there are thousands of witnesses." The car door closed with a solid thunk that seemed to echo across the gathered crowd. Through the window, Daniels stared straight ahead, his face a mask of conflicting emotions: shame, anger, fear, and something that might have been the first glimmer of understanding. Monroe turned to the twins, still holding their precious envelope. Her face softened as she looked at them, the stern judge replaced by something more maternal. "I'll explain everything," she said gently, her voice carrying the weight of promises kept and futures protected. "But first, we need to get you home." The twins nodded, drawing strength from her presence. The morning sun had risen higher now, burning away the last traces of dawn and illuminating the scene in harsh clarity. The scattered crowd with their phones still recording. The patrol car containing Officer Daniels. Camilla on her balcony documenting everything. And at the center, 3 black women standing together, holding an envelope that contained not just college acceptances but dreams that had come too close to being derailed. In the Green household, the morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, casting warm patterns across the granite countertops. Monique stood at the kitchen island, absently stirring her second cup of coffee, while scrolling through her social media feed. Her phone buzzed with a notification. A live stream from someone in the neighborhood was trending. She tapped the notification and her world stopped. There on the screen was Ava, her baby girl, being forced to her knees on the sidewalk. Handcuffs glinted in the morning sun. The ceramic coffee mug slipped from Monique's suddenly numb fingers, shattering on the tile floor. Coffee splashed across her feet, but she didn't feel it. "No, no, no," she whispered, her voice rising with each word. The live stream continued, showing both her daughters being treated like criminals. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the phone. When Officer Daniels roughly handled the envelope, the one she had given them that morning with such hope, something inside her snapped. Monique ran for the door, not bothering to grab her purse or lock up. Her car keys were already in her pocket, and she thanked God for that small mercy. The drive that usually took 10 minutes seemed to stretch into hours, even though she was breaking every speed limit. Her heart pounded in her ears, drowning out everything except the memory of Ava's tears on that video. When she finally reached the scene, she nearly crashed into a parked car. The street was filled with people holding phones, all pointed at a luxury vehicle where Judge Monroe was carefully guiding Ava and Aaliyah toward the back seats. Monique barely registered the patrol car with Officer Daniels inside, or the woman on the balcony still streaming everything. "My babies!" she cried out, pushing through the crowd. "My babies!" Ava and Aaliyah turned at the sound of their mother's voice. Their faces crumpled, and suddenly they were little girls again, running to her arms. Monique caught them both in a fierce embrace, her tears falling freely as she held them close. She could feel them trembling against her, and it broke her heart all over again. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Ava whispered. "The taillight—" "Shh," Monique cut her off, pulling back just enough to check them both for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did he hurt you?" "They're shaken but physically unharmed." Judge Monroe's steady voice came from behind them. "Monique, we need to get them somewhere safe, away from all these cameras." Monique nodded, still holding her daughters close. "I'm coming with you," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Not that Monroe would have disagreed. She understood too well what it meant to be a black mother in moments like these. They made their way to Monroe's car, the crowd parting respectfully. Camilla's livestream captured their departure, her voice providing commentary about family bonds and justice, but Monique barely heard it. She sat in the back seat with her girls, one arm around each of them, as Monroe pulled away from the curb. The drive home was slow and careful, as if Monroe understood their need to decompress. The judge kept glancing in the rearview mirror, her face showing both concern and determination. About halfway home, she pulled out her phone and activated the car's Bluetooth. "Sandra, Celeste Monroe here," she spoke clearly into the air. "I need to speak with Dean Richardson at Yale's outreach office. It's regarding 2 of our incoming students, Ava and Aaliyah Green." She paused, listening. "Yes, it's urgent. They've just experienced a serious incident of police misconduct, and I want to ensure their acceptance process isn't impacted." The twins stiffened at the mention of Yale, and Monique pulled them closer. The torn envelope sat on the front passenger seat like a silent witness to everything that had happened. When they finally reached the greenhouse, they found several news vans already parked on the street. Monroe deftly pulled into the garage, shielding them from the cameras. Inside, the broken coffee mug still lay on the kitchen floor, coffee dried in brown puddles on the tile. Monroe picked up the envelope from her seat, smoothing it carefully before holding it out to the twins. "Open it," she said gently. "This moment still belongs to you." Ava and Aaliyah looked at each other, then at their mother, who nodded encouragingly despite her red-rimmed eyes. Together, they opened the battered envelope and pulled out the contents. The Yale letterhead gleamed in the kitchen light, followed by page after page of good news. Full ride acceptances for both of them, generous stipends, and invitations to the pre-college orientation program. Everything they had worked for, everything they had dreamed about, lay in their hands. But their faces remained solemn, the joy of the moment tainted by the morning's events. Monroe watched them, her expression soft but concerned. "You got everything you dreamed of," she said quietly. Aaliyah looked up from the acceptance letter, her eyes filled with a wisdom no 17-year-old should have to possess. "Accept peace," she replied. In the living room, the television was still on, muted but showing various news channels. On every screen was Camilla's video, the twins on their knees, Officer Daniels' aggression, Judge Monroe's intervention. The chyron at the bottom read, "Viral video shows police misconduct against college-bound teens." The morning light continued to stream through the windows, catching the edges of the acceptance letters and making them glow. But instead of celebrating, the four women stood in silence, watching their private trauma become national news, each lost in thoughts of what should have been a perfect day. In her cramped dorm room at Southern Connecticut State University, Lexi Daniels sat cross-legged on her twin bed, her phone trembling in her hands as she watched the viral video for the fourth time. The morning light filtered through the half-drawn blinds, casting striped shadows across her face as she stared at the screen, unable to look away from her father's actions. Officer Ryan Daniels, her father, stood frozen in the frame, his face twisted with suspicion as he roughly handled two teenage girls. His voice came through the phone's speakers clearly. "Every dealer says they're going to college." Lexi's stomach churned. She recognized that tone, the same one he used at family dinners when discussing his intuition about suspects. She'd always stayed quiet during those conversations, picking at her food while her mother nodded along. But this time was different. This time there was video evidence. She paused the clip on her father's face, studying the man who had taught her to ride a bike, who had checked under her bed for monsters, who had helped her craft her college essays. The same man who was now trending nationwide for all the wrong reasons. Her cheeks burned with shame as she opened her email, scrolling through months of messages until she found it. The rejection letter from Yale. The formal language felt even more bitter now. "Dear Alexandra Daniels, we regret to inform you that we are unable to offer you admission to Yale University's class of 2026. Her cursor hovered over another folder on her desktop labeled College Essays. With a deep breath, she clicked it open. There it was, the essay she'd spent months perfecting. Being a white ally in a Black America. She'd written about growing up in a law enforcement family, about recognizing her privilege, about wanting to be part of positive change. The words on the screen now felt hollow, performative. She'd written about systemic racism while living under the same roof as someone who perpetuated it. Her father had read this essay, had even praised her for it. How had he not seen the contradiction? Lexi opened the document, scanning through paragraphs she'd once been proud of. "As the daughter of a police officer, I've witnessed firsthand the complex relationship between law enforcement and communities of color. I believe my unique perspective positions me to bridge divides and advocate for meaningful change." She slammed the laptop shut, the sharp sound echoing in the small room. Her reflection in the dark screen looked back at her, pale, wide-eyed, guilty by association. The door clicked open and Kenya, her roommate, walked in carrying a stack of textbooks. She stopped short when she saw Lexi's face, then glanced at the muted TV mounted on the wall. The news was still playing footage from the incident. "That's your dad, isn't it?" Kenya asked quietly, setting her books down on the desk. Lexi nodded, unable to speak. She and Kenya had become close over the past semester, sharing late-night talks about their different experiences growing up. Kenya had told her stories about being followed in stores, about her brother being pulled over for no reason, about her parents driving while black rules. Lexi had listened, had empathized, had thought she understood. Now, watching her father prove every stereotype true, those conversations took on a different weight. Kenya sat down on her own bed, facing Lexi. The space between them felt wider than usual. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle but guarded. "No," Lexi whispered, then stronger. "No, I'm not okay. And I shouldn't be." She opened her laptop again, this time pulling up Instagram. Her hands moved with purpose as she created a new post, uploading 3 items: the viral clip of her father arresting the Green twins, a screenshot of her Yale rejection letter, and photos of her college essay. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she composed the caption. "My name is Alexandra Daniels. The officer in this video is my father, Ryan Daniels. Last year, I wrote a college essay about being a white ally, about understanding privilege and working toward change. I thought I knew what I was talking about. I thought my father was one of the good ones. Today I watched him assault 2 black teenage girls for nothing more than existing while black. I watched him mock their college dreams I shared when I applied to Yale myself. The same Yale that accepted them based on their merit. The same Yale that rejected me despite my supposed insights into racial justice. I'm sharing my rejection letter and my essay to show how easy it is to think you're part of the solution while being connected to the problem. My father is proof of the system I was trying to fight. I'm not sorry for him, I'm sorry for them." Her thumb hovered over the share button. This post would change everything. Her relationship with her father, her mother's peace of mind, maybe even her family's financial support for her education. But as she looked at the Green twins' faces in the paused video, she knew there was only one right choice. She pressed post. In the stark fluorescent light of the police precinct's holding room, Officer Ryan Daniels sat rigid in an uncomfortable metal chair, his uniform feeling suddenly too tight around his neck. The room, usually reserved for suspects, now held him, stripped of his badge and service weapon. The irony wasn't lost on him. A flat screen mounted on the wall played CNN on mute, but he didn't need audio to understand what was happening. His daughter's face filled the screen, her Instagram post blown up for the world to see. Each word appeared in crisp text across the bottom of the screen, and Daniels found himself reading them again and again, each time feeling like a fresh punch to the gut. My father is proof of the system I was trying to fight. His own daughter's words. The same little girl who used to wear his spare police cap around the house, pretending to catch bad guys. The same teenager who'd sat at their kitchen table, asking him questions about police work for her college essay. Now she was publicly denouncing him, exposing him, choosing strangers over family. The post continued to cycle through the news coverage. Photos of Lexi's rejected Yale application appeared next to images of the Green twins in handcuffs. The juxtaposition made his actions look even worse, if that was possible. His daughter had masterfully crafted a narrative that stripped away every excuse, every justification he'd built up over his career. Daniels ran his hands over his face, feeling the stubble that had grown since this morning. Had it really only been hours since he'd pulled over that car? The sequence played on repeat in his mind. The cracked taillight, the nervous girls, the suspicious envelope. He'd been so sure, so convinced by years of experience that had taught him to trust his gut. But his gut had been wrong. Devastatingly, publicly, irreversibly wrong. The door opened with a sharp click, and Chief Martinez strode in, his face set in stone. The chief's normally neat appearance was slightly disheveled, his tie loosened and jacket creased. Signs of the chaos Daniels' actions had unleashed on the department. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Martinez's voice was low but vibrating with fury. He slapped a thick folder onto the table between them. "Do you know how many cases we're reopening because of you?" Daniels straightened in his chair, a defensive response ready on his lips, but Martinez cut him off. "Save it. I've spent the last 3 hours going through your record." The chief began pulling out papers, spreading them across the table like a damning deck of cards. February 2021. Black male teen detained for suspicious behavior near a convenience store. Case dismissed. March 2021. 2 black female teenagers held for potential shoplifting. No evidence found. July 2021. Black male teenager. Those were all legitimate stops. Daniels interrupted, his voice hoarse. "I followed procedure." "Procedure?" Martinez's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Half of these don't even have proper paperwork filed. No body cam footage submitted, no proper documentation of probable cause. Just your word against theirs, and guess whose word carried more weight? Daniels stared at the scattered papers, each one representing a moment he'd dismissed as routine police work. How many of those kids had been like the Green twins, just trying to live their lives, just trying to achieve their dreams? Your daughter's post is trending nationwide, Martinez continued, his voice growing quieter but no less intense. She's given interviews to 3 major networks in the last hour. Do you know what she's saying? She's talking about conversations at your dinner table, about comments you made about certain neighborhoods, about how she watched you profile people for years and said nothing. The words hit Daniels like physical blows. He remembered those dinner conversations, the casual remarks he'd made, the way he'd framed his instincts as experience rather than what they really were, prejudice dressed up as procedure. I was doing my job, he said weakly, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Your job? Martinez leaned forward, planting both hands on the table. Your job was to protect and serve all citizens. Instead, you've been systematically targeting black teenagers for years. And now, thanks to you, we're facing a department-wide investigation. Civil rights groups are demanding reviews of every arrest you've made in the past decade. The Green family's lawyer is already talking class action. Daniels felt the room spinning slightly. A decade of arrests. How many lives had he impacted? How many futures had he threatened with his instincts? His phone buzzed in his pocket, the only possession they'd let him keep. With trembling fingers, he pulled it out, hoping to see his wife's name. Instead, there was just a text message. Lexi's not speaking to you, neither am I. We're staying at my sister's. The words blurred as he stared at them. His family, the people he'd sworn he was protecting with his careful policing, had abandoned him. They'd seen him for what he really was, what he'd been all along. He slumped back in the chair, the phone slipping from his fingers onto the table. Behind him, the news continued its silent broadcast. A new headline flashed across the screen. Teens wrongfully detained by officer were headed to Yale. The truth of it all crashed down on him in that moment. He wasn't sitting in this room because of one bad stop. He was here because of who he'd become, decision by decision, prejudice by prejudice, excuse by excuse. His daughter had seen it. His wife had seen it. And now, finally, he was seeing it too. In the harsh, fluorescent light of a holding room, surrounded by the paper trail of his own bias. The news switched to footage of the Green twins, their Yale acceptance letters held high as they stood with Judge Monroe. These were the suspicious teenagers he'd handcuffed on the sidewalk. These were the futures he'd almost derailed. These were the lives he'd judged without a second thought, all because of the color of their skin. In the sterile confines of internal affairs, Detective Carla Mendez settled into her ergonomic chair, her movements precise and measured. The office around her was a testament to order. Files arranged with military precision, sticky notes color-coded by priority, and a wall calendar marked with investigation deadlines. She reached for the new case folder on her desk, though new was merely a technicality. The name, Officer Ryan Daniels, stared back at her in bold black letters. Mendez didn't need to open the folder to know what lay inside. She'd seen enough clean record officers over her 23 years in internal affairs to recognize the pattern. The seemingly pristine service records that, when examined closely, revealed systematic bias hidden beneath layers of procedural language and convenient omissions. Her fingers traced the edge of the folder, and for a moment she saw another face. Her nephew Marcus, 15 years old, honor roll student, arrested for suspicious behavior while walking home from basketball practice. That case had been dismissed, but the damage was done. Marcus never trusted the police again. That was 12 years ago, and here she was, still finding the same stories buried in official reports. She opened the folder with deliberate care, spreading its contents across her desk in a familiar ritual. Her team had already begun the preliminary work, sorting through Daniel's recent history. The numbers jumped out immediately. 42 traffic stops in the past 18 months. A post-it note from her junior investigator highlighted the racial breakdown. 38 involved people of color. "Show me who you really are, Officer Daniels," she murmured, pulling out her red pen and legal pad. The pattern emerged like a photograph developing in darkroom chemicals. Traffic stops with vague probable cause. Suspicious behavior. Matched a description. Appeared nervous. No citations issued. No body camera footage submitted. Minimal paperwork filed. Cases dismissed quietly, buried under administrative procedures. Mendez's team worked methodically around her, their movements choreographed by years of experience. Angela Chen, her senior data analyst, cross-referenced timestamps with dispatch logs. James Torres sorted through civilian complaints, creating a timeline of incidents that never made it to official review. "Detective?" Torres called from his desk. "I found something interesting. A sealed report from 8 months ago. Gas station incident." Mendez looked up, her expression unchanging but her eyes sharp with interest. "Tell me." 15-year-old male detained by Daniels for, quote, "loitering with intent. No witnesses listed, no camera footage available. Daniels reported equipment malfunction." The outcome? Mendez already knew the answer, but she needed to hear it. Kids in juvenile detention charged with resisting arrest. Original loitering charge was dropped, but the resistance charge stuck. Judge never saw any video evidence. Daniels' word against a teenager's. Mendez stood, walking to Torres's desk. The report lay open before them, its clinical language masking the human cost beneath. She thought of Marcus again, how easily it could have been him. "Pull his juvie record," she instructed. "I want to know everything about this kid before and after his encounter with Daniels. School records, family situation, prior incidents, everything." Chen called out from her station. "Detective, I've got the statistical analysis you requested. Daniels' traffic stops show a 90% racial disparity compared to demographic distribution in his patrol areas. The department average is 45%. Mendez nodded, absorbing the information. Numbers didn't lie, but they also didn't tell the whole story. Behind each percentage point was a person, a family, a future, potentially derailed by one officer's unchecked bias. She returned to her desk, picking up a red flag marker, a simple plastic tab that would set in motion a full departmental investigation. With practiced efficiency, she attached it to Daniels's folder. The room fell quiet as Mendez stood, her voice carrying the weight of 2 decades of similar investigations. "I want every single stop he's made cross-referenced with body cam data, dash cam timestamps, and witness statements. We're going back 5 years. Behind her, filling the walls of the office, stood rows upon rows of similarly flagged files, each one representing an officer whose clean record had hidden dirty truths. Each one representing countless lives impacted by systemic bias masked as procedure. The team moved into action without further instruction. They knew the drill. They'd done this dance before. Chen began pulling digital records, Torres started contacting witnesses, and the junior investigators prepared for long hours of video review. Mendez sat back down at her desk, pulling out a fresh legal pad. At the top, she wrote a single sentence. Pattern and Practice Investigation. Officer Ryan Daniels. Below it, she began listing questions that would need answers. She glanced at the photo from Daniels' personnel file, a confident smile, clean uniform, commendations visible on his chest. The picture of a good cop. But Mendez had learned long ago that pictures, like statistics, never told the whole story. The truth lay in the patterns, in the quiet accumulation of routine stops that ruined lives one traffic light at a time. Her phone buzzed, a text from Marcus, now a civil rights attorney. Saw the Daniels case on the news. Those twins could have been me. Mendez looked at the mountain of flagged files behind her desk, each one representing dozens of stories like Marcus's, like the Green twins, like the unnamed 15-year-old in juvenile detention. Each file was more than paper and ink. It was a record of lives interrupted, futures threatened, trust broken. She picked up her pen and began to write, her handwriting neat and precise. The real work was just beginning. Officer Ryan Daniels might have been the latest case on her desk, but she knew he wouldn't be the last. As long as there were officers hiding behind badges and procedure to mask their bias, her work would continue. The office hummed with focused energy as her team dug deeper into Daniel's history. They all knew what was at stake, not just careers or reputations, but the very notion of justice itself. Every file they opened, every pattern they uncovered, was another step toward accountability. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows of the Green household, casting long shadows across the untouched plates of pancakes on the table. Ava and Aaliyah sat in their matching flannel pajamas, their usual morning banter replaced by a heavy silence. Their packed suitcases stood by the front door like abandoned sentries, a reminder of the journey that should have already begun. In the kitchen, Monique moved with practiced efficiency, the soft sizzle of pancake batter hitting the griddle, providing the only soundtrack to their subdued morning. She flipped another golden-brown circle onto the growing stack, her movements mechanical, as if the familiar routine could somehow restore normalcy to their shattered world. Ava pushed a piece of pancake around her plate, creating swirls in the maple syrup. Her Yale acceptance letter lay crumpled on the counter where she'd left it the night before, its crisp edges now wrinkled from being handled too many times. Aaliyah hadn't touched her breakfast at all, her fork lying unused beside her plate as she stared out the window. Monique glanced at her daughters, her heart aching at their defeated postures. She'd spent years preparing them for the world's harsh realities, but nothing could have readied any of them for yesterday. The image of her girls in handcuffs broadcast across social media played on endless loop in her mind. "The pancakes are getting cold," she said softly, more to break the silence than anything else. Ava managed a weak smile. "They look great, Mom." She took a small bite, chewing slowly. Aaliyah continued staring out the window, her shoulders tense. Every time a car passed by, she flinched slightly, a new habit that made Monique's stomach clench. The quiet morning was interrupted by the simultaneous ping of both girls' phones. Ava reached for hers first, her hand trembling slightly as she read the screen. Aaliyah glanced at hers and immediately hit delete, her jaw tightening. "Orientation check-in closes at 5 p.m., Aaliyah muttered, pushing her phone away. "Like we can just show up now, pretending nothing happened." Ava read her email in full, her lower lip quivering. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. All those years of perfect grades, debate team victories, and carefully crafted essays, reduced to this moment of helplessness. A sob escaped her throat, breaking the morning's fragile calm. Monique abandoned her pancake making and rushed to Ava's side, wrapping her arms around her daughter's shaking shoulders. "Baby, it's okay. We'll figure this out." "No, it's not okay," Ava's voice cracked. "We were supposed to be there already. We were supposed to be starting our future, not sitting here afraid to leave our own house." Aaliyah reached across the table to squeeze her sister's hand, their fingers interlocking in a gesture they'd perfected since childhood. Monique straightened up, her expression hardening with determination. She grabbed her phone and dialed Yale's main number, pacing the kitchen as she waded through the automated menu. "Yes, hello? I need to speak with someone about incoming freshman orientation. No, please don't transfer me again. This is urgent." For 20 minutes, Monique was bounced from department to department, her frustration mounting with each transfer. Residential life referred her to student affairs, who directed her to the dean's office, who suggested she contact admissions. Each new voice offered sympathy but no solutions. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but orientation check-in procedures are standard for all students." The latest administrator's voice droned on with rehearsed politeness. "My daughters were assaulted by a police officer yesterday." Monique's voice rose, thick with emotion. "They were handcuffed and humiliated for nothing more than driving to the airport to attend your school. There is nothing standard about this situation." Ava and Aaliyah exchanged glances across the table, their mother's pain echoing their own. The phone rang again, Judge Monroe's name appearing on the caller ID. Monique answered immediately, her voice strained. "Celeste, I don't know what to do. They won't listen." Monroe's calm voice carried across the line, steady and reassuring. "I hear the stress in your voice, Monique. Let me make the call myself. This needs to be handled at a higher level." "They're not even excited anymore," Monique whispered, turning away from her daughters, but not quite far enough to hide her tears. "Everything they worked for. Everything we dreamed of. "Give me an hour," Monroe promised. "I'll call you back." The day crawled by in a haze of uneaten meals and unopened suitcases. The girls moved through the house like ghosts, jumping at every passing siren, avoiding the news notifications that kept lighting up their phones. Monique cleaned the kitchen 3 times, reorganized the pantry twice, anything to keep her hands busy while they waited. When Monroe finally called back that evening, the sun had already set. Monique put the phone on speaker, gathering her daughters close on the living room couch. "Orientation is closed," Monroe began, and Aaliyah's shoulders slumped. But Monroe continued, "However, they're holding 2 beds for you. If we can get you there by Friday, you'll still start classes on schedule." Relief flooded Monique's face, but she noticed her daughter's muted reactions. The news that should have sparked celebration was met with silent nods. Aaliyah's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "We shouldn't need a judge just to go to college." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Ava reached for her sister's hand again, and Monique wrapped her arms around both her daughters, holding them close as they sat in the growing darkness. The weight of what should have been a joyous milestone pressing down on all of them. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows of the student center, casting long shadows across the rows of folding chairs being set up for the evening's panel discussion. Lexi stood in the doorway, her hands fidgeting with the worn edges of her notebook. The same notebook that held her Yale application essay, its pages now dog-eared and coffee-stained from countless rereadings. Kenya appeared beside her, adjusting the microphone stands on the small stage. "You're not backing out, are you?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Lexi shook her head, but her stomach churned. "What if I make things worse?" Kenya paused her work and turned to face her roommate. The two had grown closer over the past weeks, sharing late-night conversations about privilege, justice, and the weight of responsibility. Kenya's steady presence had become Lexi's anchor in the storm that followed her father's arrest. "Listen," Kenya said, placing her hands on Lexi's shoulders. "Use the mic to clean up the mess he made. Start with your voice." The simple directive cut through Lexi's anxiety. She nodded, squaring her shoulders. "You're right. I need to do this." As evening approached, students began filtering into the room. Lexi recognized faces from her classes, but there were others she didn't know. Some wearing shirts with social justice slogans, others carrying notebooks and recording devices. A local news crew set up in the back, their camera lens catching the light. The panel moderator, a senior named Marcus who led the campus social justice coalition, called everyone to attention. "Tonight's discussion focuses on racial equity in law enforcement," he began. "Our first speaker has a unique perspective on recent events that have sparked national conversation." Lexi's heart hammered against her ribs as she approached the microphone. The familiar words of her essay felt heavy in her hands. She looked out at the crowd, took a deep breath, and began reading. "Being a white ally in Black America," she started, her voice initially shaky but growing stronger. "I used to think being an ally meant understanding theory, reading the right books, saying the right things. Then I realized it meant something much harder, looking at yourself, your family, your own blind spots, and having the courage to say, 'This is wrong.'" The room grew still as she continued reading. When she finished the essay portion, Lexi lowered the paper and looked directly at the audience. Her next words came from a place deeper than prepared remarks. "My father believed he wasn't racist," she said, her voice clear and steady. "That's what makes it so dangerous. Racism isn't always a slur. It's sometimes just a decision made in a second." The silence in the room became palpable. Students who had been taking notes set down their pens. The camera's red light blinked steadily in the back. "He saw 2 young Black women with a sealed envelope and decided they were suspicious," Lexi continued. "He saw their Yale acceptance letters and decided they must be drug dealers. In those split-second judgments, he nearly destroyed their futures. And he's not alone. There are thousands of officers like him, making thousands of these decisions every day." A hand raised in the middle of the room. A student stood up, his expression serious. "Would you testify against him?" The question hung in the air. Lexi felt every eye in the room on her face. She thought about her father's badge, the family photos on their mantle, the bedtime stories he used to read her. Then she thought about Ava and Aaliyah Green, handcuffed on the sidewalk, their college dreams nearly shattered in an instant. "Yes," she said firmly, "for the girls and for everyone like them." The room erupted in applause. Kenya, standing at the back, wiped a tear from her cheek. The news camera zoomed in on Lexi's face as she continued speaking, her words flowing more freely now. Phones appeared throughout the audience, recording and streaming. Social media notifications started pinging across devices as clips began circulating. Within hours, news stations would air her testimony alongside the footage of her father's arrest, creating a powerful juxtaposition that would be impossible to ignore. By the time Lexi stepped down from the stage, her father's name had become more than just another headline about police misconduct. It had become synonymous with the very bias he had claimed didn't exist. And her voice, trembling at first but growing stronger with each word, had become a catalyst for a larger conversation about accountability and change. As the crowd began to disperse, students approached her one by one, sharing their own stories of encounters with law enforcement. Some offered thanks, others shared tears, and many simply wanted to shake her hand. The local news reporter requested an interview, but Lexi politely declined. Her words had already said everything she needed to say. Kenya made her way through the crowd to Lexi's side, wrapping her in a tight hug. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." Lexi hugged her back, feeling both drained and somehow lighter than she had in weeks. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, notifications from the video clips already spreading across social media platforms. Her father's face next to hers on news broadcasts, their contrasting messages playing out for the world to see. As they walked back to their dorm room, Kenya linked her arm through Lexi's. "How are you feeling?" Lexi considered the question carefully. "Like I finally did something right," she said. "Something that matters." The evening air was cool on their faces as they crossed the campus quad. Behind them, the student center still hummed with activity as people discussed what they'd heard. Lexi's words had started something, a conversation, a movement, a change. Her father's actions had cast a shadow, but her response had brought light. The motel room's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Ryan Daniels' face as he sat on the edge of the bed, his police badge and gun long since surrendered to internal affairs. The TV mounted on the wall played silently, cycling through news coverage he couldn't bear to hear anymore. His own face appeared periodically in the corner of the screen, alongside footage of two young black women in handcuffs, their expressions a mixture of fear and resignation that now haunted his sleepless nights. His phone lay heavy in his hand, screen dim from inactivity. For the 10th time that hour, he opened his text messages to Lexi. The last message he'd sent her sat unanswered. "Please talk to me, sweetheart." The blue bubble seemed to mock him with its desperation, a father reaching across a chasm he himself had created. His thumbs hovered over the keyboard. What could he possibly say? That he was sorry? That he'd made a mistake? The words felt hollow even in his head, empty promises that couldn't undo what had been done. He started typing anyway, each attempt more pathetic than the last. "I saw your speech," he wrote, then deleted it, remembering how she'd stood tall before the cameras, her voice never wavering as she distanced herself from him. "I never meant to..." Delete. The lie died before it was fully formed. "You don't understand..." Delete. She understood perfectly. That was the problem. Finally, he managed, "I miss you." 3 simple words that carried the weight of his crumbling world. The message showed as delivered but remained unread. Daniels ran a hand over his face, feeling the stubble of 3 days without shaving, the rough texture a physical reminder of his unraveling life. The cheap motel sheets rustled beneath him as he shifted his weight, the springs in the mattress creaking in protest like a living thing rejecting his presence. The room itself seemed to mock him with its temporary nature. The generic landscape prints on the walls, faded and crooked. The thin curtains that didn't quite block out the neon sign from the parking lot, bathing everything in an intermittent red glow. The small coffee maker with its single-serving packets. Everything screamed transient, displaced, unwanted, just like him now. His phone suddenly lit up with an incoming call. His heart jumped, hoping to see Lexi's name, or maybe his wife's, who had taken to sleeping in the guest room before he'd left altogether. Instead, the screen displayed Mike Peterson, an old patrol partner from his early days on the force back when everything seemed simpler. Daniels answered, his voice rough from lack of use. "Yeah?" The single syllable scraped against his dry throat. "Ryan, man." Mike's familiar voice crackled through the speaker. "Been trying to reach you. You okay?" "Define okay," Daniels muttered, leaning back against the headboard, feeling the cheap wood press uncomfortably against his spine. "Look, I've been watching the news. Media's eating you alive, man. But this is what happens when they want a scapegoat. They needed someone to blame, and you drew the short straw." The word hit Daniels like a physical blow. Scapegoat. He almost nodded in agreement. It would be so easy to accept that explanation, to hide behind it. The media witch hunt, the public outcry, the department throwing him under the bus. It all fit the narrative he'd been telling himself since the suspension. But something about that word stuck in his throat. Scapegoat. As if he'd been chosen at random. As if his actions hadn't been his own. As if 20 years of stops and searches and arrests hadn't led directly to this moment. The body camera footage played in his mind, his own voice dripping with contempt. Every dealer says they're going to college. The certainty in his tone, the casual cruelty, the way he dismissed their dreams without a second thought, as if he had the right to judge who deserved a future. "Ryan? You there?" Mike's voice continued. "Listen, some of us are getting together tomorrow night. Show some support, you know. This whole thing's gotten way out of hand. You were just doing your job." Daniels's finger hovered over the end call button. He thought about Lexi's words from her speech. Racism isn't always a slur. It's sometimes just a decision made in a second. His daughter's voice, clear and sure, cutting through his excuses like they were nothing. Without saying goodbye, he ended the call, unable to hear another word of comfort built on lies. The silence in the room pressed in around him like a living thing. He pulled up the viral video of his arrest of the Green twins, forcing himself to watch it again. His movements looked mechanical, rehearsed, the product of years of training and ingrained responses. But now, removed from the moment, he saw something else. The girls' resignation, the way they didn't argue or fight back, the quiet dignity in their compliance, the practiced way they placed their hands behind their backs as if they'd been preparing for this moment their whole lives. He switched the phone off completely, unable to watch anymore. The screen went black, reflecting his own tired face back at him, a stranger with familiar eyes. The motel room suddenly felt suffocating, the walls closing in with each labored breath. Daniel stood up, grabbed his jacket, and headed outside. The night air was cool against his skin as he walked into the parking lot, coming to rest under a flickering street lamp that bathed him in intermittent light, visible one moment, hidden the next. Above him, stars punctured the darkness of the sky, distant and indifferent to the chaos below. A car passed on the nearby highway, its headlights briefly illuminating the empty parking lot before fading away, leaving him alone with his thoughts once more. They weren't even angry, he muttered to himself, the words barely audible. That's the worst part. They were used to it. The truth of it settled in his chest like a stone. The realization sat heavy in his chest as he stood there under the stuttering light, a former officer of the law finally beginning to understand the weight of what he'd done, not just to Ava and Aaliyah Green, but to countless others before them. People whose names he couldn't even remember, whose faces blurred together in memory, whose futures he might have altered with the same casual certainty he'd shown that day. Lives he had changed forever with nothing more than a badge and his own unquestioned assumptions. The Friday morning sun cast long shadows across the Greens' front lawn as Judge Celeste Monroe's black Lincoln Continental pulled into the driveway. Her driver, Marcus, a dignified man in his 60s wearing a crisp dark suit, stepped out to open her door. Monroe emerged with the same commanding presence she'd carried throughout her years on the bench, though today her usual stern expression was softened by concern. She smoothed her charcoal blazer and approached the front door, her heels clicking purposefully against the concrete. Before she could ring the bell, Monique opened the door, already dressed for work in her nurse's scrubs but with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Judge Monroe," Monique said, managing a tired smile. "Please come in." Inside, the house was quiet except for the muted sound of a news broadcast coming from the kitchen television. Ava and Aaliyah sat at the dining room table, their packed suitcases standing ready by the door. Both girls were dressed carefully in Yale sweatshirts and dark jeans, but their usual vibrancy was dimmed. Ava's hands were wrapped around an untouched mug of coffee, while Aaliyah scrolled listlessly through her phone. "Good morning, girls," Monroe said, her voice gentle but firm. Neither twin looked up immediately, and when they did, their smiles didn't reach their eyes. "Morning, Judge Monroe," they replied in near-perfect unison, a habit from childhood that usually made people smile. Today, it just emphasized their exhaustion. "The car's ready whenever you are," Monroe said, settling into a chair at the table. She noticed how Ava's hands tightened around her mug, how Aaliyah's thumb stopped its endless scrolling. From the kitchen, the news anchor's voice carried clearly. "The viral arrest of 2 Yale-bound students continues to spark nationwide debate about racial profiling." Monique quickly switched off the TV, but the damage was done. Aaliyah set down her phone with more force than necessary, while Ava closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. "I can't do another interview," Aaliyah said quietly. "I can't be another hashtag." "Or another inspiration story," Ava added, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone wants us to be so strong, so resilient." Monroe exchanged a look with Monique, who was already moving to make fresh coffee for everyone. The judge leaned forward, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. "Marcus," she called out, "we have time for coffee before we leave?" "Yes, ma'am," came the response from the doorway. "The traffic report looks clear." Monique returned with a fresh pot of coffee and 4 mugs, the familiar routine of serving giving her hands something to do. The rich aroma filled the room as she poured, momentarily masking the tension in the air. "Girls," Monroe began, wrapping her hands around the warm mug, "I need to prepare you for something." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Yale isn't just going to welcome you with flowers." Ava looked up sharply while Aaliyah set down her phone completely. "They'll say all the right things," Monroe continued, her voice carrying the weight of experience. "The dean will probably make a statement about diversity and inclusion. Your advisors will bend over backwards to seem supportive." She took a sip of coffee before adding, "But watch how they look at you." Monique's hand trembled slightly as she set down the coffee pot. "Should they still go?" she asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since the incident. Monroe nodded slowly, her eyes moving between each face at the table. "Yes," she said firmly, "because if you don't, they win." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Ava's shoulders straightened almost imperceptibly, while Aaliyah's jaw set in a familiar expression of determination. "You're not just going to Yale anymore," Monroe continued. "You're going there carrying something extra. It's not fair, but it's reality. Some people will see you as symbols before they see you as students." "We didn't ask for this," Aaliyah said, a trace of her old fire returning to her voice. "No," Monroe agreed. "You didn't. But here's what I want you to remember. You earned your place there long before any of this happened. That acceptance letter, that was all you. The scholarship, your hard work. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." Monique moved to stand behind her daughters, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "Your father would be so proud," she said softly. The mention of their father seemed to strengthen something in both girls. They stood up almost simultaneously, their movements more purposeful than they had been all morning. "Marcus," Monroe called out, "would you mind helping with the bags?" As Marcus moved to collect the suitcases, the girls turned to their mother. Monique pulled them both into a fierce hug, holding them as if she could protect them from everything waiting outside their door. "Call me when you get there," she whispered. Call me every day." "We will, Mom," Ava promised, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "Every single day," Aaliyah added. When they finally pulled apart, Monique's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but she blinked them back. She had always been strong for her girls, and she wouldn't stop now. The twins gathered their remaining belongings, laptops, phones, the envelope containing their acceptance letters now carefully repaired with clear tape. They followed Monroe and Marcus out to the car, each step seeming more certain than the last. Monique stood in the doorway, watching as Marcus loaded their bags into the trunk. Monroe held the car door open as Ava and Aaliyah slid into the back seat, their Yale sweatshirts bright against the dark leather interior. As the car pulled away from the curb, Monique raised her hand in farewell. A single tear tracked down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away, refusing to let it fall. She watched until the black Lincoln disappeared around the corner, swallowed by the golden morning light bound for New Haven. The late summer sun cast long shadows across Yale's historic campus as Judge Monroe's car pulled through the iron gates. Students and parents crowded the sidewalks, hauling suitcases and carrying boxes labeled with dorm room numbers. The scene looked like any other move-in day, but Ava and Aaliyah Green felt the weight of eyes following them as they stepped out of the black Lincoln. Marcus efficiently unloaded their bags while Monroe consulted a campus map, her reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. "Branford College," she said, pointing to a Gothic building with ivy-covered walls. "That's where you'll be staying." They made their way through the crowd, Monroe's presence creating a natural path as students instinctively stepped aside. At the check-in desk, a student worker in a blue Yale t-shirt looked up from her computer, her eyes widening slightly in recognition. "Green?" she asked, her voice pitching higher than necessary. "Ava and Aaliyah?" "That's right," Monroe answered before either girl could speak, her tone professional and measured. The worker's fingers fumbled with the ID cards, nearly dropping them before holding them out. She hesitated just long enough for everyone to notice, her hand trembling slightly as Ava reached for hers. "Your room is on the 3rd floor," the worker said, her eyes darting between the twins. There's an orientation meeting at 4 in the common room." Aaliyah took her ID without comment, but her shoulders were tense as they walked away from the desk. They passed groups of students unpacking cars, parents hugging goodbye, and RAs directing traffic with enthusiastic waves and bright smiles. As they approached the elevator, 2 RAs in matching polo shirts stood near the water fountain, their heads bent together in conversation. The twins were close enough to hear their stage whispers. "Those are the girls from the video, right?" "Yeah, I heard they got in because of that cop thing." Aaliyah's jaw clenched, her fingers tightening around the strap of her backpack. Ava quickened her pace, pretending she hadn't heard, but her cheeks burned with a mixture of anger and shame. Monroe's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Excuse me," she said to the RAs, who jumped apart guiltily. "Could you direct us to room 312? The RAs stammered directions, their faces flushed as they recognized who had overheard them. Marcus followed with the luggage cart as they took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The hallway was busy with moving students and emotional parents, but a woman in a blazer and sensible shoes was waiting by their door. She wore a name tag that read, Dr. Patricia Chen, Diversity and Inclusion Liaison. "Welcome, welcome," Dr. Chen said, her smile so wide it looked painful. "I'm thrilled to meet you both. When I heard you were coming to Yale, I just knew I had to be here personally to greet you." She reached out to shake their hands, holding on a beat too long. "We're absolutely thrilled to have you here, truly. You represent everything Yale stands for: resilience, excellence, the future of our institution." "Thank you," Ava said quietly while Aaliyah nodded, both girls acutely aware of other students slowing down to watch the interaction. "If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to reach out," Dr. Chen continued, her voice carrying down the hallway. "We want to make sure your experience here is nothing but positive." The words landed hollow in the stuffy hallway. Monroe stepped forward, effectively ending the conversation. "Thank you, Dr. Chen. The girls need to unpack now." Once inside their room, the twins stood in silence, taking in the twin beds, wooden desks, and bare walls. Marcus efficiently placed their bags by their respective beds and excused himself with a gentle nod. Monroe helped them unpack the essentials, her movements precise and purposeful. "I'll be staying in New Haven tonight," she told them. "Call me if you need anything." She squeezed each girl's shoulder before leaving, closing the door softly behind her. The room felt smaller once she left. Outside, they could hear the continued bustle of move-in day. Laughter, shouted greetings, the squeak of dollies on linoleum floors. But inside their room, a heavy silence settled. Ava sat on her bed, running her fingers over the fresh sheets. Aaliyah paced the small space between their beds, her footsteps muffled by the thin carpet. The manila envelope lay between them on Ava's bed, its contents mostly emptied except for one last item they hadn't looked at yet. Aaliyah finally stopped pacing and sat down, reaching for the envelope. She pulled out the photograph, their father in his dress blues standing proud at the police memorial ceremony. His smile was wide and genuine, his badge gleaming in the sunlight. It had been taken just months before the incident that would end his career and, ultimately, his life. "He believed in the badge, Ava," Aaliyah said, her voice thick with emotion. "It didn't believe in him." Ava moved to sit beside her sister, their shoulders touching as they looked at their father's face. "We'll make him proud," she whispered, "by surviving this." The morning sun filtered through the precinct's narrow windows, casting harsh rectangles of light across the linoleum floor. Officer Ryan Daniels stood outside the conference room, his civilian clothes feeling strange after years of wearing the uniform. His hand reached up to adjust a tie that wasn't there, a nervous habit from his academy days. Through the door's frosted glass, he could make out 5 silhouettes seated at the long table inside. The departmental review board had assembled early, their voices a low murmur that stopped when Daniels's knock echoed through the hallway. "Enter," called a firm voice he recognized as Captain Sarah Martinez, the board's chair. Daniels pushed open the heavy door, the familiar smell of coffee and paper files hitting him as he stepped inside. The room felt smaller than he remembered from his previous visits, back when he'd been on the other side of these proceedings, testifying against other officers. The board members sat in a row behind the table, Captain Martinez in the center, flanked by Lieutenant James Cooper and Sergeant Diana Walsh. On the far left sat Ms. Regina Torres, the civilian oversight representative, her expression carefully neutral. Detective Carla Mendez occupied the final seat, a thick folder placed precisely in front of her. "Please be seated, Officer Daniels," Martinez said, though they all knew he wasn't technically an officer anymore. Not until this was resolved. He lowered himself into the single chair facing the board, its metal legs scraping against the floor in the quiet room. Behind him, a projector hummed to life, its screen blank but ready. "This hearing is now in session," Martinez announced, her voice steady and professional. "Departmental Review Board convening to examine the conduct and record of Officer Ryan Daniels, badge number 2749, currently suspended pending investigation. Detective Mendez, you may proceed with your findings." Mendez stood, her movements deliberate as she opened the folder before her. She didn't need to read from it. Daniels could tell she had memorized every detail. "Over the past 5 years," she began, "Officer Daniels conducted approximately 230 traffic stops. Of these, 165, or 72%, involved people of color." She paused, letting the number hang in the air. "This percentage significantly exceeds both departmental averages and the demographic makeup of our jurisdiction." Daniels felt sweat forming at his temples as Mendez continued. "We identified 19 incidents lacking proper documentation. These range from missing dashboard camera footage to incomplete incident reports." She lifted a stack of papers. "In 7 cases involving minors between the ages of 14 and 17, verbal complaints were made either at the scene or later at the precinct. None of these complaints resulted in internal reports being generated or investigated." Lieutenant Cooper leaned forward, his reading glasses catching the fluorescent light. "And these complaints, what was their nature?" "Excessive force, unwarranted searches, and verbal intimidation," Mendez replied, her voice steady, The most recent incident with the Green twins follows this pattern, but with one crucial difference. It was captured on video. The projector flickered to life and Camila Reyes's live stream filled the wall. The footage was crystal clear. Daniels approaching the car, the twins' compliance, the escalation that followed. The board watched in silence as the scene unfolded. "Every dealer says they're going to college," Daniels heard his own voice say through the speakers. He closed his eyes but couldn't shut out the sound of handcuffs clicking, of Ava Green's quiet sobs. The video faded to black, replaced by a social media post. Lexi's face appeared on screen, her features so like his own, but set with a determination he'd never seen before. Her words scrolled beneath her image. "My father believed he wasn't racist. That's what makes it so dangerous. Racism isn't always a slur. It's sometimes just a decision made in a second. I believe the system my father worked in is broken because he helped break it." Ms. Torres made a note on her pad, her pen scratching loudly in the silence that followed. "Detective Mendez, in your professional opinion, do these incidents represent isolated occurrences or a pattern of behavior?" "A pattern," Mendez answered without hesitation. "One that became increasingly pronounced over time, suggesting an escalation in bias-driven policing rather than any attempt at correction." Sergeant Walsh shuffled through some papers before speaking. "And the Green incident, how does it fit into this pattern?" "It represents the culmination," Mendez explained. "Every element we've identified in previous stops was present. The initial profiling, the escalation without cause, the assumption of criminal intent. The only difference was visibility." Captain Martinez surveyed the room before focusing on Daniels. "Officer Daniels, you have the right to speak on your own behalf. Do you wish to do so?" The room fell silent. Daniels could hear his own heartbeat, feel the weight of every eye upon him. Slowly, he pushed himself to his feet, his legs unsteady beneath him. The words he'd rehearsed in his motel room fled his mind. Instead, he found himself thinking of Lexi's face on the screen, of Ava Green's tears, of all the unwritten reports and unopened complaints, of his own voice saying, "Every dealer says they're going to college." "I thought I was a good cop," he said, his voice rough, "but I was only a comfortable one." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Daniels lowered himself back into his chair, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his words. Captain Martinez straightened her papers with two sharp taps against the table. "The board will now begin deliberation. Officer Daniels, please wait outside." The metal chair scraped against the floor once more as Daniels stood. He walked to the door on legs that felt like lead, each step echoing in the silent room. As he pulled the door closed behind him, he caught one last glimpse of the screen, frozen on his daughter's face, her words still scrolling beneath her image, a testament to everything he'd failed to see. The autumn air carried a sharp chill as the crowd began to gather outside the precinct. What started as a handful of protesters swelled into dozens within an hour, their signs bobbing like colorful waves against the gray concrete building. The messages were clear and bold. "We believe the girls," painted in thick black letters, "badge not equal to immunity, decorated with careful precision, and protect. Don't profile held high by determined hands." Sarah Chen, a local coffee shop owner, had brought extra thermoses of hot coffee for the protesters. She poured steaming cups for those who had been standing since dawn, her breath visible in the morning air. "I saw those girls come into my shop sometimes," she told anyone who would listen. "Honor students, sweet kids. Could have been my daughters." The crowd's quiet determination filled the space with an electric tension. They weren't shouting or marching, just standing, watching, waiting. Their presence alone spoke volumes. A young woman in a navy peacoat made her way through the gathering, her blonde hair tucked under a knitted beanie. Few noticed her at first. She was just another face in the crowd. But then someone gasped, and whispers rippled through the group like wind through leaves. "That's her, that's Lexi Daniels." She carried a simple white poster board with black letters. "This is how we hold the line." Her hands were steady as she held it, but her face betrayed the weight of the moment. She found a spot in the front row, directly facing the precinct's main entrance. A reporter from the local news station approached her cautiously, microphone lowered. "Miss Daniels, would you like to make a statement about today's hearing?" Lexi shook her head, her eyes never leaving the building's facade. The reporter respected her silence and stepped back, but not before capturing a photograph. In it, Lexi's gaze was unwavering, her sign held at chest level, her posture straight despite the obvious emotional burden she carried. Inside the precinct, Detective Carla Mendez stood at a second-floor window, arms crossed over her chest as she observed the growing crowd below. Officer Rodriguez joined her, coffee cup in hand. 20 years on the force, Rodriguez said, shaking his head. I've never seen this kind of turnout for an internal review. Mendez kept her eyes on the scene below, watching as more people joined the gathering. A group of college students had arrived, their Yale sweatshirts visible under open jackets. They carried signs with statistics about racial profiling in traffic stops. It's not just a cop on trial anymore, Mendez replied, her voice carrying the weight of understanding. It's the blueprint. She uncrossed her arms and turned to face Rodriguez. Every department has their Daniels, officers who've been operating just under the radar, whose bias shows up in patterns rather than single incidents. She gestured to the crowd. But now people are connecting those dots. They're seeing the bigger picture. The morning light grew stronger, casting long shadows across the precinct steps. More media vans pulled up, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal trees. Reporters set up their equipment, occasionally approaching protesters for comments. Lexi remained steadfast in her position, her sign now slightly weathered from the wind, but still clearly legible. Other protesters had formed a protective circle around her, shielding her from unwanted attention while respecting her space. The hours ticked by. People shared snacks and stories. A group of teenagers started a quiet chant that spread through the crowd. No more silence, no more fear. Justice must be crystal clear. Inside the building, the review board members emerged from their chambers. Their faces were composed but grave as they walked down the corridor. A junior reporter who had been camping out near the water cooler quickly pulled out his phone as it buzzed with a message. His eyes widened as he read the text. Without speaking, he hurried toward the exit, already composing a tweet. The news spread through the crowd like wildfire. He's losing the badge. The energy outside shifted immediately. The quiet determination gave way to a low murmur that grew steadily louder. Signs waved with renewed purpose. People began to move, creating a ripple effect through the gathered masses. Lexi's grip tightened on her sign, her knuckles white against the cardboard. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but her stance remained firm. The photographer captured this moment too. The strength and sorrow intertwined in her expression, telling a story more powerful than words. The crowd continued to stir, their movement reflecting the weight of the moment. They weren't celebrating. There was too much gravity in what this represented. Instead, they stood together, witnesses to a small but significant shift in the landscape of justice. Detective Mendez watched from her window as the news spread through the gathering below. Her expression remained neutral, but her posture softened slightly. She'd seen many internal reviews in her career, but this one felt different. This one felt like a turning point. The morning sun now stood high in the sky, its light reflecting off the precinct's windows and casting a glare over the scene. The crowd continued to move like a living organism, their signs catching the light, their presence a testament to change in motion. Through it all, Lexi stood her ground, her sign held high. This is how we hold the line. The message seemed to take on new meaning now, speaking not just to her father's case, but to something larger, a moment of accountability, a step toward transformation. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the precinct's press room, casting a harsh glow on the assembled crowd. Metal folding chairs creaked under the weight of reporters and department officials, their notepads and phones at the ready. The air felt thick with tension like a storm about to break. Officer Ryan Daniels stood off to the side, his attorney's hand resting lightly on his shoulder. His police uniform was gone, replaced by a navy suit that seemed to hang loosely on his frame. Though his face remained carefully blank, his hands betrayed him, trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie for the third time in as many minutes. The review board members filed in, their faces grave as they took their seats behind the long table at the front of the room. 5 name placards lined the surface, each bearing the weight of decades of law enforcement experience. At the center sat Chief Commissioner Martha Reeves, her silver hair pulled back severely, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. Detective Mendez slipped into the back of the room, positioning herself near the door. She watched Daniels carefully, noting how he seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of what was coming. The room fell silent as Commissioner Reeves cleared her throat and leaned toward the microphone. After careful review of all evidence presented, including but not limited to body cam footage, witness statements, historical data analysis, and testimony from both civilian and law enforcement sources, this board has reached its decision regarding Officer Ryan Daniels. The sound of camera shutters filled the brief pause as photographers captured Daniels' expression. His attorney squeezed his shoulder, but Daniels didn't seem to notice. Officer Ryan Daniels is hereby stripped of his badge and firearm, effective immediately. Commissioner Reeves's voice carried clearly through the speakers. Furthermore, he will be formally charged with abuse of authority, false detention and civil rights violations in connection with the unlawful detention of Ava and Aaliyah Green. A low murmur rippled through the room. Daniels didn't move, didn't blink, as if frozen in place. Additionally, Reeves continued, all traffic stops and detentions conducted by Officer Daniels over the past 5 years will be reopened for comprehensive audit and possible restitution to affected parties. Initial review suggests a pattern of bias that cannot be ignored or excused. The commissioner removed her glasses, looking directly at Daniels for the first time. This department has failed not only the Green sisters, but countless others who encountered similar treatment. That ends today. Reporters burst into action, hands shooting up with questions, voices overlapping in their urgency. 2 internal affairs officers approached Daniels, handcuffs at the ready. His attorney tried to create space to manage the moment, but the press surged forward anyway. As they led him toward the door, a reporter's microphone caught his whispered words. "I didn't see them. Not really." His voice cracked on the last word, heavy with a realization that came too late. Camera flashes exploded around him as the officers guided him through the hallway. The precinct's familiar corridors, ones he'd walked countless times with confidence and authority, now felt foreign under his feet. Each step echoed with finality. Outside, the autumn air hit him like a physical force. The crowd's energy shifted as he emerged, their signs raised higher, their presence more pointed. But among the faces, one stood out, or rather, deliberately didn't stand out. Lexi stood perfectly still in the front row, her blonde hair catching the midday sun. She held her sign. "This is how we hold the line," at chest level, her grip steady. As their eyes met briefly across the space between them, neither moved, neither spoke. The moment stretched like a thread pulled too tight, then snapped as Daniels was guided toward the waiting vehicle. Without ceremony or dramatic gesture, Lexi lowered her sign. She handed it to the protester next to her, a young woman with kind eyes who accepted it with understanding. Then, without looking back, Lexi turned and walked away from the scene, her steps measured and deliberate. The crowd's attention remained fixed on Daniels as he disappeared into the car, but a few eyes followed Lexi's retreat. Her straight back and steady pace spoke of resolution rather than defeat. On a news van's external monitor, the banner scrolled in bold letters, "Daniels dismissed. National conversation rekindled." The words repeated in an endless loop, each pass adding weight to their significance. Miles away, in the quiet sanctuary of Yale's Sterling Memorial Library, Ava and Aaliyah Green sat at a wooden table, their phones displaying the breaking news. The Gothic architecture soared above them, centuries of learning embedded in the stone walls. Afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colored patterns across their faces as they scrolled through the updates. Ava's finger hovered over a video clip of Daniels being led away. Aaliyah watched her sister's hesitation, understanding written in the slight furrow of her brow. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The weight of the moment, of what it meant and didn't mean, settled around them like dust in the library's ancient air. They looked at each other, a glance that carried years of shared experience, of understanding too deep for words. In that silence, in that look, lived all the complexity of justice served, but scars still healing, of victory tinged with the knowledge that one case didn't change the whole system. The library's quiet enveloped them, offering a space to process without pressure to perform or explain. Around them, other students studied and typed, unaware of the significance of this moment to the two young women at the corner table. The normalcy of it all, the scratch of pencils, the soft tapping of keyboards, felt both jarring and comforting. The autumn sun filtered through tall windows of Yale's Lindsley Chittenden Hall, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors of the small auditorium. Students filtered in for the afternoon seminar, Race, Justice, and the Future, their backpacks heavy with fresh textbooks and new laptops. The room hummed with the nervous energy of first years still finding their footing in this prestigious space. Ava and Aaliyah Green slipped in quietly, choosing seats near the back where the shadows were deepest. They'd perfected the art of entering rooms unnoticed over the past week, a skill born from the constant whispers and sideways glances that followed them across campus. Ava pulled out her notebook, her movements precise and controlled, while Aaliyah slouched slightly in her chair, her eyes scanning the room with quiet intensity. Professor Diana Chen, a petite woman in her 50s with silver-streaked black hair, stood at the podium arranging her materials. Her presence commanded attention without demanding it, her careful movements suggesting someone who chose her words and actions with deliberate care. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the space. "Welcome to Race, Justice, and the Future. Before we dive into our syllabus, I'd like to begin with something recent, something real." The screen behind her flickered to life, and suddenly Camilla Reyes's voice filled the room. Two girls, nothing in their hands, cuffed like criminals. The familiar footage played out. The sidewalk, the handcuffs, Officer Daniels's rigid posture, Judge Monroe's arrival. The quality was slightly grainy, but the impact remained razor-sharp. In the back row, Ava's hand found Aaliyah's under the desk, their fingers intertwining in a grip that had become instinctive during moments like these. They'd seen the footage countless times now, but watching it play out in an academic setting surrounded by their peers felt different, more exposed somehow. Professor Chen let the clip run its course before turning back to face the class. "Today," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "we examine how systems punish innocence and reward suspicion, and how two young women carried their future in an envelope and nearly had it ripped away." The shift in the room was subtle but unmistakable. Heads turned slowly, students craning their necks to look toward the back of the room. Some tried to be discreet about it, others made no attempt to hide their curiosity. Ava kept her eyes fixed on her notebook while Aaliyah met the stares with steady calm. Professor Chen continued her lecture, weaving together threads of history, law, and lived experience. She never directly referenced the Green sisters' presence, but their story served as a contemporary anchor for broader discussions about privilege, power, and presumption of guilt. The 75 minutes passed quickly, filled with raised hands and passionate discourse. When Professor Chen dismissed the class, there was a moment of hesitation as students gathered their things, many casting uncertain glances toward the back row. A small group lingered as others filed out. They approached the twins with careful steps, like people approaching a memorial. A girl with thick-rimmed glasses spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw the video when it happened. You handled it with more grace than I ever could," added another student, a tall boy with kind eyes and nervous hands. Aaliyah looked at them steadily, her response measured but carrying weight. "You would have done the same. Or maybe you wouldn't have walked away." The words weren't accusatory, just matter of fact, leaving space for uncomfortable self-reflection. More students approached, each offering their own version of support or acknowledgement. Some shared personal stories of similar encounters. Others admitted their own privilege in never having to face such situations. The twins listened, responded when necessary, but maintained a careful distance, emotional armor they'd learned to wear long before arriving at Yale. As the last students drifted away, Professor Chen approached their seats. "Thank you for being here today," she said simply, not offering platitudes or asking for their perspective. She understood that their presence alone was contribution enough. The campus had transformed by the time they emerged from the building. Evening was settling in, painting the Gothic architecture in deep purples and blues. They walked back to their dorm in comfortable silence, their footsteps echoing off ancient stones that had witnessed centuries of similar journeys, though perhaps few quite like theirs. Their dorm room felt like a sanctuary after the emotional weight of the seminar. The space was still sparsely decorated, save for a few family photos and the Yale acceptance letter they'd framed, torn edges and all. They sat by the window watching city lights blink to life beyond the glass. New Haven spread out before them, a tapestry of illuminated windows and street lamps, each light representing stories they'd never know. Aaliyah reached into her bag and pulled out the worn photograph of their father. His smile was frozen in time, proud in his police uniform, standing before the memorial wall. The irony of the image wasn't lost on either of them, a black officer who believed in the system, only to have that same system fail his daughters. "We're here now," Aaliyah said, her voice soft but determined. "And they still can't stop us." Ava nodded, her eyes fixed on the city lights. Then she added, with quiet conviction, "Let's keep our seats." The words hung in the air between them, simple but profound. It wasn't just about occupying physical space in a classroom or on campus. It was about claiming their right to exist in spaces that weren't always designed for them, about turning presence into persistence. The city continued to glow beyond their window, indifferent to the weight of the moment unfolding in one small dorm room. But in that space, between two sisters who had walked through fire to reach these halls, something shifted, not dramatically but definitively, like a page turning, like a door closing on one chapter and opening to another. If you enjoyed the story of Ava and Aaliyah, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.